I thought my life was perfect, until a single text shattered everything. What I uncovered next wasn't just betrayal, it was the start of a journey that would change my life forever. Looking back now, it's hard to pinpoint exactly when things shifted. Life with my wife, Kate, felt steady and familiar. Over a decade of marriage will do that. We had our routines, our private jokes, and that unspoken ease that comes from knowing someone so well. I truly believed we were happy. At least, I was. Then, Mira moved in next door. You ever meet someone who just seems to change the atmosphere of the moment they walk into a room? That was Mira. She had this magnetic energy that seemed to pull people in. Her blonde hair was always loose, as if she couldn't be bothered to tame it, and her smile came so effortlessly it was almost disarming. She had this knack for making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world. It didn't take long for her to become the center of our little neighborhood. She hosted wine nights, impromptu weekend barbecues, and casual chats over the fence. Her door always seemed open, and people were drawn to her warmth. They just kept coming, myself included. I won't lie, Mira had a charm about her that was hard to ignore. She had this way of making you feel seen, like you weren't just another face in the crowd. At the time, it felt harmless. It wasn't that I was unhappy with Kate, but there was something undeniably refreshing about Mira. She'd ask me questions about my work, my hobbies, and she seemed genuinely interested in the answers. It was nice, you know, to feel that kind of attention. But, let me be clear, at that point, it was nothing more than that. Or so I thought. I wasn't searching for anything, I was still loyal to Kate, even though her late nights at work had started to nag at me. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Longer hours, late meetings, and the way she came home exhausted and detached, it all seemed like part of the grind. I told myself it was just a rough patch, the kind every couple faces. But the distance between us began to feel heavier. I'd try to engage her, asking about her day, hoping to spark a conversation, but it was like talking to a wall. Her replies were brief, her focus always somewhere else. More often than not, her eyes were glued to her phone, scrolling endlessly, like whatever was on that screen mattered more than the person sitting right beside her. At first, I didn't want to admit it, but it was hard to ignore. Kate wasn't really there anymore. Not with me. Meanwhile, Myra's gatherings became something of a refuge. There was a lightness to her home, a kind of ease I hadn't felt in a while. Those evenings with the neighbors, sharing a laugh, clinking glasses, they felt like a reprieve from the growing tension at home. Myra's laugh had a way of cutting through the noise in my head, and the way she'd hold your gaze a second too long. Well, it was hard not to notice. Kate, of course, wanted no part of it. If she wasn't tied up at work, she was too tired or had an early start the next day. And so, more often than not, I found myself at those gatherings alone, surrounded by Myra's effortless charm. I told myself it was harmless, just a way to unwind. But the truth was, the more distant Kate became, the more I found myself looking forward to those evenings at Myra's. It wasn't long before Tom, my best friend since college, started giving me grief. "You're different lately," he said one evening, that teasing grin of his making it clear he wasn't about to drop the subject. "I'm just saying, Myra's got you looking a little too happy these days. What's going on, man?" I brushed him off with a laugh, but his words stuck. I told myself it was nothing, that he was reading too much into things. But deep down, a part of me wondered if he wasn't entirely wrong. I wasn't doing anything wrong, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. I was just trying to get a little breathing room, an escape from the heavy silence Kate carried home every night. And then there was Martha. Every neighborhood has a Martha, the older, well-meaning but overly nosy lady who seems to keep tabs on everyone from behind her lace curtains. She'd catch me on my way back from Myra's place, her words always half teasing, half warning. "You be careful, James. That girl's nothing but trouble." Or, "Not everyone who smiles at you has good intentions, you know. I'd laugh it off, brushing aside her comments like they were harmless. But somewhere deep down, I wondered if she was onto something. After all, what did it say about me that I felt more alive at a neighbor's gathering than I did sitting in my own living room? And then came the first real sign that something wasn't right. Kate started coming home later and later. At first, I thought it was just more of the same, long hours, demanding projects. But it wasn't just the late nights. It was her demeanor. She'd walk in looking drained, yes, but there was a strange contentment in her expression, like something, or someone, was lifting her spirits. I could feel it in my gut, that undeniable sense that something was off. But the truth was, I was afraid to dig too deep. When I'd ask her about it, she'd wave me off with the same vague excuses. "Work's insane right now," she'd say, barely glancing at me as she dropped her purse and disappeared into the bedroom. Sometimes, she wouldn't even say goodnight. I wanted to believe her, to convince myself that I was just imagining things. But no matter how hard I tried, that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. One evening, Mira hosted another one of her casual gatherings. This one felt different. It was quieter, more intimate. The kind of night where the laughter comes softer, the conversations deeper. I ended up sitting with her on the porch, just the two of us, the buzz of the party fading into the background. Talking to Mira was effortless. She had this way of drawing you in, making you feel like the most interesting person in the world. She asked me about things Kate hadn't mentioned in years, my love for hiking, that dream I'd once had about starting my own business. And she didn't just nod along, she really listened, her eyes locked on mine like every word mattered. As the evening stretched on, her laughter grew warmer, her touch softer. At one point, she reached out, her fingers brushing my arm, and it sent a jolt through me. Her gaze lingered, steady and unreadable, before she tilted her head and smiled, that teasing curve of her lips making my chest tighten. "James," she said, her voice low but playful. "Do you ever get the feeling you're missing out on something? Like there's this whole world out there, just waiting for you to take the first step?" Her words hit me harder than they should have. There was a part of me, one I'd buried under years of routine and quiet disappointment, that wanted to say yes. Yes, I felt that. Yes, I wondered about the life that might be waiting for me, just beyond the edges of what I knew. But instead, I just smiled back, unsure of what to say, caught somewhere between the life I had and the one she seemed to be offering with nothing more than a glance. I laughed it off, trying to play dumb. "I'm a married man, Mira," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince, her or myself. Her reply was quick, sharp, and cut deeper than I expected. "Yeah, but are you happy?" she asked, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that left me unsettled. That question stuck with me, long after I walked back home that night. It echoed in my mind, daring me to answer it honestly. The days that followed didn't bring any clarity. If anything, things with Kate only got worse. She was like a shadow of herself, drifting through the house without so much as a glance in my direction. Her phone had become a permanent fixture in her hand, and her attention was always somewhere else, somewhere far away from me. That growing distance between us wasn't just in my head, I knew her too well to brush it off as paranoia. This wasn't the Kate I married, and the more I tried to reach her, the more unreachable she seemed. So yeah, I kept going to Myra's gatherings. I craved that feeling of being seen, of having someone actually listen to me. I knew it was wrong, or at least, it felt wrong. But I couldn't stop. Mira had become my confidant, someone who seemed to understand the version of me I'd almost forgotten existed. And while we never crossed any physical lines, the tension between us was undeniable. There was always this unspoken what if hanging in the air, making every conversation feel like a thread pulled too tightly. But everything changed one evening. It started with the sound of tires on gravel. I glanced outside and couldn't help but notice the car. A convertible, top down, sleek, the kind of ride that makes you wonder who's got the kind of money for something like that. But my attention didn't stay on the car for long. It was Kate who stepped out of it, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. She looked different. Not the tired, stressed-out version of Kate who came home late and barely said a word. No, this Kate had a glow about her, a kind of energy that I hadn't seen in years. She wasn't just radiant, she looked like she'd had the best night of her life. And as I stood there watching her, my chest tightened with a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle: confusion, suspicion, maybe even jealousy. I didn't say anything right away. I just watched as she walked into the house, her smile lingering longer than it should have, as if she'd been keeping a secret. And in that moment, I realized my world was on the brink of something I wasn't ready for. I watched as Kate leaned into the car window, saying something to the driver, her smile wider than I'd seen it in months. Then, with a quick laugh, the car peeled off into the distance, leaving me standing there, feeling like the ground had shifted under me. "It's just a car, James," she said later when I asked about it. "Jesus, can I take a cab without getting the third degree?" Her tone was sharp, dismissive, and I let it go, for the moment. What else could I do? I had no proof of anything, just this nagging gut feeling that something was off. But once suspicion takes root, it's like a switch flips in your brain. You start seeing everything through a different lens, noticing things you'd once brushed aside. And the more I watched, the clearer it became: Kate was slipping away from me. It wasn't just her distant demeanor or the way she'd disappear into her phone for hours. It was the way she carried herself, the lightness in her step when she thought I wasn't paying attention. And then, there was that car. The thing started showing up everywhere. Always the same sleek red convertible, turning up at odd hours, almost like it was taunting me. I told myself it was just a coincidence, but that explanation didn't sit right. My gut was screaming at me to connect the dots. And one night, when I saw the car pull up outside our house again, my heart dropped. My whole body buzzed with adrenaline, fear, and anger all tangled together, pounding in my chest like a war drum. I couldn't move at first, just stood there, staring as the driver stepped out. And that's when I saw him. David. Her boss. He looked like he'd just walked out of a high-end cologne ad, slick, well-dressed, with his hair perfectly combed back and that smug grin plastered on his face. He oozed confidence, the kind that made your stomach twist in knots, because you knew he wasn't the kind of guy who got turned down often. I stayed put, frozen in place, watching from the window as he strolled up to the door with a casual ease that felt infuriatingly rehearsed. And Kate? She didn't seem surprised. She greeted him like it was the most normal thing in the world. My stomach churned as I tried to piece together what the hell was going on. An hour passed before I saw the front door open again. Out they came, laughing softly, their heads close as they exchanged a few last words. I wanted to storm outside, demand answers right there and then, but I didn't. I held back, convincing myself I needed more proof. If I confronted her now, without solid evidence, she'd find a way to brush it off again, make me feel like I was overreacting. So, I did the only thing I could think of: I started keeping a journal. Sounds ridiculous, right? Like something a teenager would do. But I didn't know how else to handle it. I needed a record, a way to keep track of all the little things that didn't add up. The late nights, the text messages she shielded from view, the glowing energy she came home with after being at work. Every time the car appeared, every glance and gesture that didn't feel quite right, it all went in the journal. It felt stupid at first, scribbling down every detail like some kind of amateur detective. But I needed something to hold on to, something that would either confirm my fears or let me let them go. Because at that point, I didn't trust my own mind anymore. I needed to make sense of the chaos in my head. It felt like my thoughts were crashing into each other, too tangled to untangle. Putting them down on paper seemed like the only way to step back and see the bigger picture. So, I started writing everything down, every night Kate came home late, every excuse she gave, every time that red sports car appeared at her office. It was all there, scribbled into that journal. And man, it didn't take long for those pages to fill up. The pattern started emerging, small pieces forming a picture I didn't want to look at. Kate's excuses became rehearsed, her absences more frequent, and her demeanor colder than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away, that our life together was becoming this hollow shell. And then there were the flowers. One day, a bouquet arrived at the house. No note, just her name on the delivery slip. It seemed innocent enough, but it didn't sit right with me, not after everything else. Who sends flowers without a reason, or without signing their name? Tom, my best friend since college, could tell something was up. He didn't need me to say anything, he could see it in the way I carried myself, the way I stopped showing up to our usual Friday night hangouts. "You all right, man?" he'd ask, his tone careful but persistent. "Yeah, just busy with work," I'd lie, even though work was the last thing on my mind. Tom didn't buy it, of course. He never did. But he didn't push either. He just kept an eye on me, waiting for me to say something real. One evening, though, he caught me off guard. I must have looked particularly drained because instead of his usual joking tone, he just said, "James, you don't have to tell me, but whatever's going on, you deserve the truth. Whatever it is, you deserve to know." His words hit me harder than I expected. It was like he'd thrown me a lifeline, giving me permission to stop drowning in my doubts and fears. But the truth? That was a whole different beast. Part of me thought I was ready for it, that knowing would be better than this constant uncertainty. But another part of me knew better. Whatever the truth was, it was going to change everything. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. Not yet. What I found out would change everything. By this point, it felt like Kate had already slipped away from me, like the woman I married was becoming a stranger. Our evenings, once filled with laughter and conversations about work, dreams, and even the most random thoughts, had been reduced to silence. We'd sit in the same room, but it felt like we were miles apart. I tried, God knows I tried, to break through that wall. I'd ask about her day, crack a joke, anything to spark some connection. But she'd just nod absently or mumble some half-hearted response, her attention fixed on that phone. It was like I wasn't even there anymore. And yeah, that phone, it became a constant reminder of everything wrong between us. It was always in her hand, always the priority. One night, Mira hosted another one of her gatherings, and for once, Kate decided to come along. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe she was feeling guilty, or maybe she just wanted to put on a show for the neighbors. Who knows? Either way, she was there, and so was her phone. I remember it like it happened yesterday. Kate was chatting with one of the neighbors, completely engrossed in their conversation, while I stood off to the side, nursing my drink. That's when I saw it. Her fingers darted across the screen, entering a new password. It was quick, just a few seconds, but it was enough to plant a seed of suspicion I couldn't ignore. I didn't confront her. Not then, anyway. What was I supposed to say? That I was watching her every move like a jealous husband? No, I kept it to myself, letting the doubt simmer. And then, one night, fate finally threw me a lifeline. It was late. Kate had already gone to bed, and the house was cloaked in the kind of quiet that makes you feel every thought louder than it should be. I sat there, staring at her phone lying on the table, the screen dark and unassuming. This was my chance. Whatever answers I was looking for might be in there, and for the first time, I felt ready to find out. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario. Each thought was darker than the last, twisting my stomach into knots. Then, as if on cue, her phone lit up beside her. Half asleep, Kate rolled over, grabbed it, and tapped at the screen. My heart started pounding. This was my chance. I turned away, feigning sleep, but kept one eye open, watching as she lazily entered her passcode. My pulse quickened with every tap of her finger, and I memorized the sequence as if my life depended on it. The moment she set the phone back down and drifted off again, I waited, breathless, until her breathing evened out. Then, I reached for it. What I found, I don't think I'll ever forget. Her messages. Her photos. Her voice notes. It was all there, between Kate and David. At first, I tried to tell myself it wasn't as bad as it looked. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was overreacting. But the further I scrolled, the clearer the picture became. It was like peeling back the layers of a rotting onion, each one more foul than the last. She'd told him everything. Everything. How she didn't love me anymore. How she felt trapped, stuck with some loser she wished she'd never married. How she wished she'd met him sooner so she could have avoided this mess entirely. My stomach churned, but I kept reading. I had to know. I had to see it all. Then I saw the message that shattered me completely: he's gone all day tomorrow. It'll just be you and me. Can't wait to finally be alone together. That line played over and over in my head like a broken record, each repetition twisting the knife deeper. She wanted him here, in our home, in our bed, with no hesitation, no shame, no second thoughts. I don't know how long I sat there, scrolling through those messages, feeling the ground crumble beneath me. It was like my entire world was falling away, piece by piece. Part of me wanted to wake her up right then and there. I imagined throwing the phone in her face, watching her squirm, forcing her to explain herself. But another part of me, paralyzed by shock, by the sheer weight of it all, couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, letting the betrayal sink in, unsure of what to do next. I felt numb. Completely and utterly numb. It was like I was trapped in some surreal nightmare, except there was no waking up, no relief, no thank God, it was just a bad dream moment. Kate carried on as if nothing had changed, moving through her morning routine with a calm efficiency that made my stomach churn. She barely glanced in my direction as she got ready for work, her phone clutched tightly in her hand like it was a lifeline. Then, with a casual, "See you later," she breezed out the door, leaving me behind. I sat there, empty. Hollow. The betrayal sat in my chest like a cold, heavy stone, weighing me down and making everything else seem trivial. Insignificant. But I couldn't confront her, not yet. Not until I figured out what the hell I was going to do. Later that day, Mira noticed something was off. She always seemed to have this uncanny ability to read me, to see the cracks I thought I'd hidden. When her eyes met mine, full of concern, I knew I couldn't brush it off. "I just need to talk to someone," I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She gave me one of her warm, understanding smiles. "Of course. Come over tonight," she said gently. "We'll have dinner, and you can tell me everything." That evening felt like some kind of twisted therapy session. Myra's home was as inviting as ever, cozy, with candles flickering on the table and soft music playing in the background. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air as she worked on dinner, her presence grounding me in a way I didn't expect. I sat at her kitchen table, nursing a glass of wine and trying to keep myself from completely unraveling. When we finally sat down to eat, the atmosphere was intimate, almost comforting. She poured another glass of wine and looked at me with a quiet patience, waiting for me to speak. And I did. I let it all out, the messages, the lies, the gut-wrenching feeling of betrayal that had been eating away at me since that night. I told her everything, every agonizing detail, as she listened intently, her expression a mix of sympathy and quiet anger on my behalf. When I was done, Mira leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. "James, you can't just sit back and let this happen. You have to do something." I nodded, but the truth was, I had no idea what to do. Confrontation wasn't in my nature. I wasn't the type to scream or throw things or make a dramatic scene. That just wasn't me. I shook my head, staring down at the half-empty wine glass in my hand. I don't know, Mira, I said finally. I don't know what to do. I feel lost. Her hand reached across the table, resting lightly on mine. You'll figure it out, she said softly, her voice steady. But you can't keep this bottled up. You deserve better, James. Don't forget that. Her words should have been reassuring, but all I felt was the weight of the decision I wasn't ready to make. I didn't know what came next, but one thing was certain, I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I feel so powerless, I admitted, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. Like she's taken everything from me, and I can't even fight back. Myra's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw something shift in her expression, something fierce, almost protective. Then fight back, she said firmly, leaning closer. Her voice was steady but charged with determination. Expose them. People like David and Kate think they can get away with it because no one ever stands up to them. But when you have proof, real, undeniable proof, they don't look so powerful anymore. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. A hidden camera? It sounded insane, like something straight out of a bad movie. But as absurd as it seemed, there was a twisted logic to it. A way to take back control. A way to bring their betrayal out of the shadows and into the light. You really think I should do that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, unsure whether I was asking her or myself. Mira didn't hesitate. I do, she said, her voice firm. You deserve to know the truth, James. You need to take care of yourself. And I'll help you. Whatever you need. Her unwavering support felt like a lifeline, pulling me out of the abyss I'd been drowning in. But then, before I knew it, the conversation shifted, the charged air between us giving way to something neither of us could resist. 1 minute, we were talking about revenge, the next, we were kissing, hard and desperate, like we were clinging to each other just to stay afloat. I knew it was wrong, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing that made sense. I didn't think about the consequences, about Kate, about anything except the way Myra's hands felt on my skin, the way her eyes locked onto mine as if I was the only man in the world. We stumbled together, lost in the heat of it, breaking something inside me that was already fractured beyond repair. The next day, Mira helped me set up the hidden camera. Together, we placed it in my own bedroom, positioning it carefully to capture everything. Right there, on the bed where Kate and David thought they could carry on their affair in secret, we built our trap. As I stepped back to survey our work, the lens seemed to glare back at me, cold and judgmental. I knew one thing for sure, the truth was coming for them, whether they were ready for it or not. You'd think I'd feel guilty, sneaking a camera into my own bedroom like some sleazy private eye in a low-budget movie. But guilt was the last thing I felt. The betrayal had burned through any shame I might have had, leaving nothing but resolve in its place. I needed to know. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The days that followed crawled by like molasses, every moment an eternity as I waited for the inevitable. Then, one night, it happened. Like clockwork, Kate texted me, working late. Don't wait up. A line that once meant nothing now felt like a sledgehammer to my chest. But I played my role perfectly, just as she expected. I went home, made myself a quiet dinner, and sat on the couch, waiting for the show to begin. I remember the sound of the door opening late that night, Kate's familiar laugh drifting down the hallway, paired with the deep murmur of David's voice. I stayed put, pretending to read a book, my hands clenched tightly around the pages, straining to hear every sound that slipped through the walls. There it was, soft laughter, the creak of the bed, the rustling of sheets. That was all I needed to know. My plan had worked. The next morning, while Kate was at work, I retrieved the footage. My hand trembled as I plugged the camera into my laptop, my stomach twisting with anticipation and dread. I knew what I was about to see, but nothing could have prepared me for the sight of it. There it was, high-definition betrayal, playing out right in front of me. My wife, the woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with, kissing her boss with an intimacy that made my stomach churn. I forced myself to watch, my heart breaking with every second, as they laughed, whispered, and tore apart everything I thought we had. But I wasn't going to let them off easy. That wasn't how this was going to end. Without hesitation, I uploaded the footage, anonymously, of course, to a popular social media site. It felt surreal, watching it go live, knowing that what had been my private heartbreak was now out there for the world to see. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. The comments poured in, strangers dissecting every frame, every movement, calling out Kate and David for the shameless people they were. Some of the remarks were brutal, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel guilty. They deserved every ounce of shame, every piece of ridicule hurled their way. Then came the fallout. That evening, Kate walked through the door, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, her expression frozen in disbelief. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the screen as the video played on a loop. Her face shifted as if a switch had been flipped, disbelief morphing into unrestrained fury. "How dare you," she screamed, her voice sharp, venomous, shaking the walls. "How dare you do this to me? You ruined everything." I stood there, calm, her words washing over me like they meant nothing. "I ruined everything?" I asked, my tone steady, almost eerily so. "No, Kate. You ruined it the moment you decided to sleep with David." It was like a dam bursting. She threw every insult she could think of at me, her words cutting deep and fast. "At least he understands me," she spat, her voice trembling with emotion. "At least he makes me feel alive." That was the moment I realized something profound. I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, just relief. A wave of calm settled over me, the kind that comes with finally letting go. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't fighting for a woman who had no intention of fighting for me. I met her furious glare with a quiet finality. "Good," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Then go to him." And just like that, the weight I had been carrying lifted. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I met her gaze with a steady calmness that surprised even me. "Leave," I said, my voice unwavering. "Go to him, because we're done, Kate. There's nothing left here." And with those words, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the weight of everything she'd done. It wasn't about revenge anymore, or some fleeting sense of payback. It was about taking back control of my life, reclaiming my happiness and leaving behind the toxic mess that had become my marriage. For the first time, I felt free. And the best part? I didn't have to look back. While Kate and David scrambled to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives, I was already moving forward. It's strange how quickly life can flip on its head. One day, you think you're living the perfect suburban dream, and the next, you realize it's all been a lie. David lost his job almost immediately after the video went viral. Turns out, his company didn't appreciate one of their top executives being caught on camera having an affair with an employee. Kate didn't fare much better. When her office found out she'd been sneaking around with her boss on company time, they fired her too. Just like that, their perfect little world came crashing down. But that was their mess to deal with, not mine. Now, the question was, what comes next? I remember staring out at the fading light one evening, letting the silence fill the space where the chaos had once been. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice quiet but curious. Mira just shrugged, giving me that easy, reassuring smile of hers. "Now we start fresh. You deserve a new beginning, James." "We both do." It was so simple, but it was the truth. We began talking about our future, a real future. One without lies, without betrayal. Mira made me realize I deserved to be happy, to be with someone who actually cared. As much as I hated to admit it, Kate's betrayal was the wake-up call I hadn't known I needed. Kate tried reaching out a few times after everything fell apart, but I didn't respond. I didn't need her in my life anymore. The divorce went through faster than I'd expected. We split everything cleanly, no fights over the house, no petty arguments over money or possessions. I didn't need to bleed her dry, I didn't need anything from her. Freedom was worth more than anything we could have fought over. When those final papers came through, I felt a deep sense of closure, like a door slamming shut on a chapter I'd been ready to leave behind for years. For the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. Mira and I decided to celebrate our new beginning. We booked a cozy little place by the ocean, a quiet escape where we could focus on each other and the possibilities ahead. As the waves crashed against the shore and the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized just how far I'd come. Life doesn't always go the way you plan, but sometimes, it pushes you towards something better. And this? This was better. A fresh start, a new chapter, and a happiness I hadn't dared to believe was possible. I remember standing on that beach, the waves crashing around my feet, Myra's hand warm in mine. The salt air filled my lungs as I looked out at the endless horizon, thinking about how far I'd come. So much had changed, how much I had changed. It wasn't a fairy tale. Life is rarely that simple. But it was real, and it was mine. Kate. Last I heard, she was struggling to piece her life back together, bouncing between temp jobs and trying to find steady work. I didn't feel sorry for her. She made her choices, and those choices had consequences. It was almost poetic how quickly everything unraveled for David once the truth came out. He fell hard, and Kate was left in the wreckage, trying to figure out how to rebuild. But that wasn't my concern anymore. That chapter of my life was closed. The beach trip with Mira was exactly what I needed, a chance to breathe, to let go, to start fresh. We spent our days lying in the sun, swimming in the ocean, and talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in what felt like forever, I started to feel like me again. The James the First used to be before all the lies, before the betrayal. Was it perfect? No. Nothing ever is. But it was honest. And that honesty, that openness, was worth more than any picture-perfect marriage ever could have been. With Mira, there were no pretenses, no facades. Just us, building something new, something real. We're already planning more trips, dreaming of seeing the world together, living the kind of life I once thought was out of reach. A life filled with adventure and possibility. So yeah, Kate is gone. David is nothing more than a ghost from my past. And me? I'm still here, standing stronger than I ever thought I could. Ready for whatever life throws my way. Because in the end, that's what it's all about, moving forward, no matter what.